Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. All right, Thursday is the first game day of the 2024 season for the Giants. They'll be facing the Detroit Lions in a preseason opener. That is, if any Lions and Giants are still standing after all of the fisticuffs this week. And here to help me discuss what might or might not happen on Thursday night is Jeremy Reisman, producer of SB Nation's Pride of Detroit. Jeremy, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Ed, how are you doing?
I'm good. Hey, really important question that nobody listening to us cares about, but I care about. Do you hate the title producer as much as I do?
It is weird. It sounds like we're
TV people.
Yeah. Like we're in the, I don't know. Like we're just we're the money behind the operation or something like that.
Yeah. I much prefer editor or something like that, but it is what it is. And they signed a paycheck, they can call us whatever they want.
Right, exactly.
All right, so let me ask you, by the way, I had to ask you, you had intended to be at those joint practices on Monday and Tuesday. And I know that the Lions were delayed in getting into New Jersey on Sunday. What was going on there?
Well, maybe you and some of the other local people know better than I, but Jersey essentially shut down their airport. They were telling planes not to even take off because of the weather there on Sunday. And so, I originally planned for a like 2 p.m. flight out of Detroit. I sat in the airport, and then it was suddenly a 3 p.m. flight, then a 4 p.m. flight, then an 8 p.m. flight, then a 10 p.m. flight, and then it was just not a flight anymore. And it wasn't just me. Like there were a couple Lions employees that were on the exact same flight. There was another writer that was on the same flight, and either there was one that took a crazy route of flying to Connecticut on the red eye and driving 2.5 hours at like 2 a.m. I wasn't about to do that. The team's official writer got there a day late on Tuesday, and a couple of Lions interns just didn't end up going at all, like me. So
crazy. Well, you didn't miss much.
Yeah, nothing happened at all, right?
Nothing happened at all. No fines were levied. Everybody was smiling and happy and got along, and sunshine and rainbows and all that.
Yeah. No one. I mean, there certainly isn't any video evidence of anything to the contrary.
Yeah. So, in all honesty, I've been going to training camp practices for the Giants since 2008. And I understand that, that was the tail end of when they did the real two-a-days and all of that. But I have to admit, I mean, what went on those 2 days is really old school.
Yeah.
I have never seen anything like that. I saw Dan Duggan, Giants writer for The Athletic, tweeted, the $200,000 fine was certainly worth the entertainment value. Does any of that bother you at all? It didn't really bother me all that much, but did it bother you at all?
Not really. I mean, I understand that this went like above and beyond probably what should. The scraps are pretty normal though in general.
Yep.
Like it's people raising their competitive level and emotions getting the better of people, but there does come a point where it becomes counterproductive, right? And I think that's what Dan Campbell talked about that after the first day, because it seemed like the first day was significantly worse than the second, where it's just like, if we're having to pull people off for 3 minutes after every play, we're not getting the work that we need done in. So from a productivity standpoint, I guess maybe it bothers me a little bit, but like, I don't know. It's guys in a high intense environment.
Yeah. On Tuesday. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I don't think this is a sign of undisciplined football teams and things like that. I think people like to jump to that conclusion, like, oh, well, this is Dan Campbell's old school football team that's going to get 1 million personal foul penalties and stuff like that. And that just hasn't been what the Lions are about in the 3 years that Dan Campbell has been there. And so I don't think there's suddenly this dirty, angry, late hit, punch you in the face team,
Hmm.
despite the all the Dan Campbellisms that you've heard.
Yeah, it's interesting. This was my first exposure to Dan Campbell in an interview setting, and
Hmm.
the the intensity and the demand for physicality and what he wants from his football team. Um, it just drips off the guy,
Sure.
even unintentionally. It just drips off the guy. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, he's a fascinating guy, and someone that like
Yeah.
I'd maybe one day like to write a book about, just because he's a really really interesting guy, extremely nice, and but like yeah, you're right. Like he does demand high intensity. There's no doubt about it. I just think once you like cross over into dirty or
Hmm.
undisciplined, those are things that I don't think define what he wants or who this team is.
Right. I will say it was a million degrees out there both days.
Yeah.
Um, it was probably 100 plus on the field, just in terms of what it felt like. At least on Tuesday, they saved all of the scrums for the last 15 or 20 minutes of
Right.
practice. At
Right.
least on Tuesday they saved it all until the end, and at least nobody got hurt. So
That's the most important, right? Like,
yeah.
because you do worry sometimes when you see your cornerback taking swings at helmets and like throwing full punches at helmets and
Hmm.
face masks. You're like, please don't
Yeah.
break a finger.
Yeah, and it's funny because Daniel Jones, Giants quarterback, got in one of those scrums on
Right.
on Monday,
Uh
and he's less than 9 months off surgery for the torn
huh.
ACL.
Right.
And I will say this: he doesn't look, act, run anything like a guy who's coming back from that. He's pretty much good to go.
Yeah.
But we asked Brian Daboll about that on Tuesday morning, and I have to be honest with you. Brian Daboll said the right words in terms of, I don't want my quarterback in that scrum,
Right.
but the smile on his face was like, hell yes. I'm
Right.
hell yes, I'm there for it.
Yeah.
Good for him. You
Yep.
know, he said the right words, the ones he's
But it didn't
supposed to
match his
say.
face.
No, it definitely didn't match his face. The look on his face was like, heck yes, Daniel, go get some.
I love that.
you know, and I think the Giants as a group, the funny thing about Daniel Jones, and we're off the track a little bit here. I don't know what I know the outside impression of Daniel Jones. The funny thing about Daniel Jones is, in the building, in the locker room, in the organization, they love him
Hmm.
for what he is and for what he does and for how he carries himself. And they love stuff like that when he throws his
Oh
nose
yeah.
into stuff like that. So he scored a lot of points with his teammates the other day. But let's talk about the Detroit Lions a little bit. I know you weren't there. I know you were following along with with all the Lions writer stuff and with our stuff at Big Blue View.
Sure.
Um, just let me start with this: your impressions or your thoughts on the Giants just after 2 days. I mean, not any player in particular, although there is one I'm sure you'll want to talk about, but just your thoughts on the Giants and on how they acquitted themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting team to me because, you have Brian Dable go out there and get some immediate success, win Coach of the Year, and then obviously they have the backslide that they did last year. And I watched the offseason Hard Knocks, so I'm kind of at least a little bit in tune with what their needs were, what they did this offseason, things like that. And it seems like it's all kind of centered around that offensive line. Really, a lot of their offseason focus was there, and I that's where I was focused in on. Going in, I wanted to see how the line's defensive line, which is also kind of reformed and a focus of the offseason, how those two would match up. And based on the reports that I've heard, it sounds like the Giants offensive line kind of, I wouldn't say worked them, but like held their own at least, right? Like at least it was a kind of even set kind of match, particularly when it comes to like the Lions pass rush. I think that was relatively held in check. Which little disheartening on my end because obviously the Lions have Aiden Hutchinson, but they're trying to figure out who else they have along that defensive line.
Hmm.
But obviously I think I mean, that could be a transformative change for the Giants. Like that, we all I'm not
Well,
telling any tales out of school here that
no.
the Giants had one of the worst offensive lines in NFL history last year. And so if they can even get to average, like that is a monumental jump,
Right.
and it helps out your quarterback, it helps out your run game, it helps out everything. And so
Hmm.
I mean, you could see a team like the Giants take a big jump if that is true, if that holds together for the entire season. And so I'm not talking like become an NFC favorite necessarily, but sneak into a playoff spot. Like I think that that's legitimately on the table if the offensive line turns out to be as good as they hope it is.
Yeah, I find the Giants are so interesting because you can make a case for them to be a 4-win team,
Right.
but you can also make a case for them to go win 9 games if things go well,
Yeah.
and be in that hunt the last couple of weeks for a playoff spot. So it's very, very interesting. And I will say this: I would venture a guess that Lions cornerbacks have had enough of Malik Neighbors after the last couple days.
It sure seems like it. I've seen all the stats out there that one incompletion to neighbors the entire 2 days of practice, and
Hmm.
again, that's another big question on the lines. Like, they made a ton of investments in the secondary, whether it be first round pick Terran Arnold, second round pick Ennis Rakestraw. They traded for Carlton Davis, who they plan on being their number one corner this offseason. Unfortunately, they also re-signed Emmanuel Mosley, who suffers a torn pec in the first practice. But a lot of changes over there, and none of them seem to have an answer for neighbors. And it'll be interesting to see where that one eventually plays out, because it certainly seems like Neighbors is a very special talent, but where does he fit in? Is he going to fly out of the gate and be a top 10 receiver? Is he going to be a top 20 receiver? We'll see, but there are a lot of really good receivers in this league. There are a lot of really good receivers in the Lions division. So it was certainly a good test. And guy like Terran Arnold, obviously as a rookie, needs that kind of reps to go against. Obviously he's not, Neighbors is not foreign to him, seeing as they're both SEC guys. But
Hmm.
it to do on an NFL level, I think is good practice for everybody. And while I wish the Lions would have performed better in the secondary and just covering him, uh, it's all part of the process. And I rather them make the mistakes now than in September.
Absolutely, I hear you. You know, can we have Dan Skipper on the Giants? Can we? And you know why I brought that up?
Yeah.
You know why I brought that up? You saw it in my post on I think it was actually it was Tuesday's practice. Dan
Yeah.
Skipper, if you guys don't know, there were a couple of I will refer to them as skinny, pimply faced teenage boys, giving Kirby Joseph and several other Lions the business from behind the chain link fence. And Dan Skipper, backup offensive lineman for Detroit, just sort of meandered by, and Skipper's what, 6'9", 330.
Yeah. He's
He
a
just
mountain of a man.
he just sort of meandered by, and I was standing right there, and he just says to these two teenage boys, he says, "Why are you guys on that side of the fence?" you know,
He's and it's so
and
perfect
I,
for Dan Skipper,
and
because
I and I loved it.
yeah, he's
I
just
loved
that
it.
kind of guy. He's very outspoken. He has like a very dry sense of humor too, so I'm sure that delivery was just like very nonchalant, like all that sort of. And he's kind of like a legend in Detroit now, because I'm sure you guys saw the game against the Cowboys, the Lions Cowboys primetime game last year, where they did the 2 point conversion that failed, that got called back because of an illegal formation that wasn't actually a legal formation, but Dan Skipper was right in the middle of that. He was the one that actually, they thought he reported as eligible, but it was really Taylor Decker who did. And so Dan Skipper was livid, and just like, I think he's just become a legend for that moment now. Even though he's essentially, the third offensive tackle on the team, maybe even the fourth offensive tackle on the team.
Hey, one of the things that both Dan Campbell and Brian Daboll talked about, and we've seen this before with the Giants in some of these joint practices. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
there were a couple of guys that they poached from the
Yeah,
Lions after the Lions let them go
sure.
a year ago. is the fact that these teams use these joint practices not only to help each other, they use them as scouting opportunities.
Right.
So what I'm curious about is, are there a couple of positions on the Lions roster that you see as quote unquote heavy, where there are quality, a couple of quality NFL guys that could help an NFL team, who might hit the street here in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, I would probably point to two positions in general. The first being tight end. They don't have a ton of like proven talent, but they just have a really deep bench there. In fact, the offensive coordinator Ben Johnson said this is the best tight end room he's ever seen. So the Lions are their top two guys are set in Sam Laporta and Brock Wright. Um, they're probably going to keep a guy named Shane Zylstra, who's a guy who was a wide receiver, moved to tight end. James Mitchell is a former 5th round pick, I want to say, day 3 pick. Had a torn ACL when they drafted him, so I think they expected him to develop. He's really on the roster bubble right now. I think he's still really young. I think he still has a lot of potential, but for whatever reason, he hasn't really broken out like I think the Lions expected. He's a guy that I think could, maybe be one of those guys that's like change of scenery. Let's restart the career and see if we can develop something there. The other two veteran guys, and I think there's a chance they keep one, but not both. Parker Hesse and Sean McEwen. Both of them are kind of journeymen. I think McEwen was with the Cowboys, so you might recognize the name there. Those are primarily blocking tight ends. So if you have a need for a blocking tight end, I think they're only going to keep one of those two. And then cornerback room is also really interesting. Again, it's not like they have a ton of proven talent there, but it's a bunch of young guys that they're just not going to have the space to develop everyone. Now, the injury to Emmanuel Mosley is going to
Can
move everyone up a spot, unfortunately.
can
So
can we have Ennis Rakestraw? Can we have
no, no.
Rakestraw?
I'm afraid you can't. You can't have Rakestraw. You can't have Terry on. But if a Kindle Vildor is interesting to you, a veteran who's played a lot in this league, but if you were paying close attention to the Lions last year, he became famous for in the NFC Championship game, the ball going off his face and then being completed to a 49ers receiver.
Okay.
Not a fair representation of his talent level, but he's kind of one of those veterans battling for a last spot. An interesting name here. He might end up making the team, but Stephen Gilmore to me is a really interesting guy. Brother of Stephon Gilmore. The Lions kept him on the roster all of last year, but didn't play him at all as an undrafted rookie, trying to develop him. But again, like the numbers game is just really tough for him right now. So he's a guy that could be on the outside looking in, but the Lions certainly see the developmental potential in someone like that. So if the Giants are in the market for a young developmental guy and he hits the waiver wire, I would expect the Giants to maybe get in on that. Cause I know you were saying on our podcast that corner is a room that has a lot of questions there. So I would say keep your eye on Stephen Gilmore and see if he hits waivers.
We will do that because corner is definitely a need. The Giants have, I think, within the last week, claimed 3 separate cornerbacks on
There you go.
waivers, and the uh, the weirdest thing, they claimed Christian Holmes,
Hmm.
former Washington Commanders cornerback, on Monday, and on Tuesday he showed up as missing practice because he had to go have tests for something or other.
Hmm.
So it's like,
Okay.
wait, what happened here?
Right.
So the short version of that is the Giants will probably be claiming another cornerback sometime soon.
There you go.
you know,
Hey, you got to take advantage of that high waiver wire priority while you can.
Absolutely, you got to do what you got to do. Hey, let's talk a little bit about Thursday night. Um, I was in Dan Campbell's press conference the other day. He said Jared Goff is probably not going to play.
Yeah.
I don't expect. I don't expect. Many of the Giants starters, if any, to
Yeah.
play. Um, are you expecting any of the Lions, starters to play, and what are you really looking for, out of Thursday night?
Yeah. I would not expect. I was trying to like run through every name earlier today, and I think it's quite possible that 0 starters on offense play. Their offensive line last year didn't play in, I think, any of the preseason games. That's why Dan Campbell loves these joint practices so much. It feels like they can have a little bit more control of the situation and get those starters the work that they need. So definitely no one on the offense. I think defensively it's a little bit different just because they have so many young players that I know they want to get a ton of reps.
Hmm.
So and last year they played some of their rookies early too. So I think you could see Terrion Arnold out there. I think you could see Ennis Rakestraw. I think you could see some of their other draft picks and maybe even some of their second year guys. So like Jack Campbell, their first round pick last year, their Mike linebacker. He was kind of in a part time role a lot last year. I think it's possible that he gets a little bit of playing time early. But everyone else, I expect their starters on the defensive line are probably going to be out. Maybe Levi Onwuzurike gets a little bit of playing time because he's a guy that's just had so much troubles with a back issue his first 3 years that he doesn't have a ton of experience on the field. So he's another guy that
Hmm.
might be out there, but like Lee McNeil won't play, Aiden Hutchinson won't play,
Nope.
Kirby Joseph won't play, so you can avoid
Right.
those fireworks. As for what I'm looking for, I mean, the interest on the Lions side is it's the defense. It's to see where the depth is, particularly in that cornerback room that I think is very much wide open. The wide receiver 3 spot is a primary focus. So we know Jameson Williams is going to be a starter. We know Amon-Ra is going to be a starter. We know Khalif Raymond is kind of going to be that wide receiver 4 that comes off the bench. But there's this 3-way battle for the wide receiver 3 spot, and no one is really separating themselves. This guy named Darius Fountain has come out of nowhere, literally nowhere. He's been in the NFL for 5 years and has very little to show for it. Is kind of the front runner for the job. He's number 12 if you're looking for him out there. He's kind of in the lead right now, but I think the expectation was more for someone named Antoine Green, number 18. He was a 7th round pick last year, didn't get a lot of playing time, but grew as the season went on behind the scenes. And then Donovan Peoples-Jones, a guy who has had some success in this league, but it's kind of slipped down the depth chart for whatever reasons. Lions traded for him in the middle of last season as just kind of like an extra body that they needed, but he didn't produce a ton. They were kind of hoping, I think, this offseason he'd develop a little bit more chemistry with Jared Goff, but it just hasn't happened yet. So that's the primary focus, I think, on the Lions offense. And then also Hendon Hooker. This is going to be his first preseason game. Lions 3rd round pick last year. They really want him to win that starting job. So I would expect to see Hendon Hooker a ton on Thursday night. Like
the number 2 job, you mean, right? Not the
yes,
starting.
I'm sorry. Did I say the starter? I'm sorry.
Yes, you did. I think
no,
Jared Goff's paycheck has something to do with that. But yes,
yes. Let me be on record. Jared Goff's job is safe. They want to see if Hendon Hooker can outright win the backup job over Nate Sudfeld. Sudfeld's earned a lot of trust in this team, and he's steady, but he doesn't have the extra dimension that Hendon Hooker has. The problem is Hooker has been very inconsistent in his first training camp, and so I think they're hoping he takes a step up in a game situation. So you're going to see probably at least 3 quarters out of Hendon Hooker, if not even more.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I'm curious about Hendon Hooker because I just wonder if the Giants, somewhere, have some interest in Hooker.
Yeah.
I know, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll have heavily scouted quarterbacks for the last couple of years. And
sure.
And, I know Giants fans always ask about, well, could we trade for Hendon Hooker, or would we pick Hendon Hooker up if the Lions didn't want him? So I think Giants fans will be interested in watching Hooker as well.
I'm very much a never say never person in this business because I've been burned before. I do think the Lions want to see this one out and see how he can develop. And I would be very surprised if they traded him just after his first preseason. But, if he lights it up and puts on a show and puts on a bunch of really good film, and I don't know, the Giants I think the Giants would have to offer something significant to get him at this point, just because it is his first season and the Lions spent a high 3rd round pick on him. So if they're not getting at least a high 3rd or a 3rd in return, I'm not sure the return on investment would make sense for the Lions when he's so early in his development, even though he is 27 years old or something. He's that old of a prospect.
Yeah. But by the way, you mentioned Khalif Raymond.
Yeah.
And I shake my head every time I see this guy make a play. The Giants had him.
Yeah.
I think they might have had him for 2 training camps.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember exactly, but they had him and could have used him. And I'm blown away by what he's made out of his career. Never Not a superstar, but I'm blown away by what the guy's made out of his career.
Yeah, he's kind of one of those like secret that they call them glue guys, right? That are just like they're important to the team even if it doesn't show up on the stat sheet. He's got the wide receiver room all working in the right way. Very like he very much has a mindset like on Ross St. Brown, where he's going to outwork everybody in that room. Um, he's been a fantastic punt returner. I know he had some issues with that early in his career before he came to Detroit. He was muffing punts and things like that, and became a confidence issue. He got over that, and now has been one of the most trustworthy guys on special team. And he has a role offensively. You know, it's not as a starter, but I think he has at least 400 yards in all 3 seasons here in Detroit, up to 600 and change in his best year. So, you know, it's like you said, it's not a superstar position, but he's been very, very reliable. And I know the Lions love him. Like
Yeah.
he's everything they want in a competitor.
I love guys who are willing to put in the extra work. And you
Yeah.
may not know this story. And if you ever get a chance to ask Khalif about it, there was a year when he was with the Giants, and as you mentioned, he was dropping a lot of balls, and he had dropped a lot of balls. He bought a jugs machine and put it in his apartment.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
he had it in his apartment. I'm pretty sure it was in his apartment, and I'm like, what is up with that? How do
Yeah.
you do that? But
Yeah.
but he went home and used his own jugs machine, which I thought was really cool and showed a lot of dedication, and it obviously worked for him.
Yeah.
So
It's
um,
it's one of those like small success stories that I think you don't hear enough about, because there are a lot of guys like him around the league that make a living out of special teams and like rotational roles on offense or defense, and you can string together a 10-year career in the NFL doing that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jeremy, I think that's probably a good spot for us to call it a day. If Giants fans want the Lions perspective, why don't you tell them where they can find your stuff and where they can follow you on social media and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, prideofdetroit.com is obviously where all of our written content lies. We do live streaming and video content as well. So if you want to see our thoughts on the preseason game, I think we'll be live Sunday night talking about everything that we saw. You can find us on YouTube there, prideofdetroit.com/at YouTube. We also stream on Twitch. So if you are familiar with Twitch, it's not just a gaming platform. We stream our shows there. So twitch.tv/pride of Detroit there. Or we have a podcast. You can find us on podcasting platforms. And you can find me right here at Detroit Online on Twitter if you want to just hear me ramble about food and Lions and game shows and everything that comes to my mind, because I'm not just a stick to sports guy on social media, much to the chagrin of some people.
There you go. I'm old. I don't do Twitch. I don't do TikTok. I don't do that stuff. You know what? You know what? I watch. I had to laugh because Nick Filato, who's also credentialed for Big Blue View this year for the first time, the first practice he was at, we decided to take a selfie.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna take a selfie from the sideline and we're gonna post it on our Big Blue View Twitter account, whatever. And I said, Nick, I said, which one of us is going to take this? And he just looked at me and he said, let the millennial do it.
Smart. Smart.
Yeah,
You gotta
very
know your own
smart.
strengths.
You know what? I mean, I'm an old writer at heart,
Yeah.
and I go to these practices and you want to do practice reports, and I have to be honest, if I'm going to sit there and take video, and if I'm going to try to take video and try to post video and and try to, try to tweet about every play and this and
Yeah.
that, then I'm going to miss half of what's actually going on out there. So,
I'm with you.
folks who follow the Big Blue View account, if Nick and I are both there, you're going to find all the video and most of the tweets from Nick, because I'm actually going to be paying attention.
Hey, that's the sign of a good producer. You're
There you go.
delegating.
There you go. I'm letting the millennial do
First
it.
circle.
There you go. Letting the millennial do it. All right. Hey, Jeremy, thank you very, very much for the time and the insight. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.